My guest today is Leigh Brennan, host of the Camino Cafe, a popular podcast featuring pilgrims from around the world that have walked the Camino. She started the podcast after walking her first Camino in 2019, and Leigh recently completed her second pilgrimage on the Camino Frances. For this walk, she walked from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France to Rabanal, a beautiful Spanish village in the heart of the Camino, where she is now living. Leigh has one daughter, Kylie, currently in architecture school, and a Labrador doodle puppy called Cooper. The Camino Cafe podcast is a platform for pilgrims to share stories about their Camino journeys. Leigh has interviewed numerous pilgrims, auberge owners, Camino authors, and Camino filmmakers. Prior to becoming a full-time pilgrim, Leigh was a long-time yoga teacher, owning her own studio in the United States. Some months ago, I had the privilege of appearing on her show, and I'm so happy today to return the favor. Your journey is so fascinating, Leigh, because it really is a walk into authenticity, accomplishing your dreams, despite initial fears and trepidations. So just take us back to where it all began in 2019.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Raino, for having me on. And, it was an honor for me to be able to interview you on my podcast, and a big, big honor to be on yours. So thank you so much. So back to 2019. 2019, I was heartbroken. I had been in a long-term marriage that had just ended, and I was kind of at the end of my rope. I didn't know what I was going to do. My entire life had changed. I thought I was becoming an empty nester because we took our daughter off to college, and I thought that was going to be tough. And then 2 months later, I found out my marriage was over. And so I decided to walk the Camino. But it wasn't at all how I wanted to walk it. I had always imagined that I'd be walking the Camino kind of in retirement, and, every day would be happy. And instead, I walked my Camino pretty much crying every morning for a couple of hours. So the first hours of every walk was crying and praying and trying to figure out my life. And what I found was that one day I was walking, and it must have been in the afternoon because the crying had stopped. And I all of a sudden realized that I was just smiling and happy for no particular reason at all. And I just stopped in my tracks and realized that under all this pain, I still existed, and that my life wasn't over. I was going to have to build a new life, but it wasn't over. And from that moment on, I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew that I was going to probably be okay, that, things were going to be all right. And so I went back home and decided that somehow the Camino was going to be my life. And I knew that I didn't want to go back and be a yoga teacher at a studio anymore. I'd kind of been there, done that. And when I was walking, I noticed a lot of people were having some physical challenges. And I thought, well, maybe I can combine yoga with pilgrimage, and this can be something of benefit for folks. So I set out to start a retreat business, and really got on that, was close to having our first group that was going to be ready to go in 2020. And I was on my way to Spain at Easter, and was going to walk another Camino, do some research, and we were going to do the first tour. I had a business partner. We were going to do the first tour in fall of 2020. But as we all know, that didn't happen. And instead, I got diverted, had to go back home to what I called the boiling pot of my life, right back home to the family home that was, no longer the family home. Luckily, my daughter got to come home from school because of COVID. She had to go online. So she did come back home. So I wasn't alone the whole time. And that was, bonus time with my daughter. But it was also a very tough time because I had planned 2020 to kind of be, my gap year of being this new single girl, of starting a business on the Camino, and, walking a bunch of Caminos. And instead, I was, like everyone, stuck back at home. And during this time, I I just started working on a lot of things, started a Facebook community. I was really tired of all of the two-dimensional things I was seeing about the Camino, right? I could read about it, I could listen to a podcast, or I could, you know, look at pictures of my own Camino, but I wanted to have some interactions. So in this Facebook community, I started hosting monthly talks, and we kind of had this happy hour. And then that just kind of grew. I started meeting all these people, and I, from that, somehow started meeting Camino authors and filmmakers. And then all of a sudden I realized I kind of have something here. Maybe I should start sharing this information. And so I just started kind of throwing up the videos on YouTube. And then I realized, oh, I have an audio track. Maybe I have a podcast. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a yoga teacher, but I love the Camino. And being able to talk to people about the Camino helped keep my Camino essence alive. From all of that, I started realizing that doing the retreats maybe wasn't going to be exactly where I needed to be, that maybe it was time that I did something really big. I've been working very, very hard on my grief processing. For me, losing my marriage was really, really painful. And luckily, through the help of a great
I just
therapist.
want to touch
Yeah.
on that point, because this is a story that so many pilgrims go through.
Yes.
We all know this process of what some pilgrims call the path of crucifixion, going through that grief, going through that
Yes.
trauma of the past, which in retrospect actually is an elevation of consciousness when you look at it.
Yeah, definitely.
And when I hear your story, the transformation actually started after you came back from the Camino.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
where things really took off, which reminds me of a slogan I saw on a wall in Finisterre. The journey begins after the Camino.
Yes, absolutely. Someone actually said that to me during my walk in 2019. I'm like, what are they talking about? The Camino ends in Santiago. No, not at all. It was a portal for me, right? Stepping in now. I get to Santiago, and it's a stepping into my new life. And for me, I had a very good therapist that it took me a long time. I was really angry at myself. Like, why am I not getting better? Why am I still grieving? I walked the Camino. I'm supposed to be better. And she was very wise. And she talked to me a lot about, grief is kind of like this, if you imagine as a marble inside like a mason jar. In the beginning, that marble is so big, it touches all the sides of the marble jar. There's no space left for anything else. And everybody grieves differently. It takes time. Grief is not linear, as we all mistakenly have taken some of the work that's been done about grief. It's not linear. It's up and down, and it can be really,
Yes,
really
absolutely.
challenging. Right?
And people deal with grief so differently, and I think that is so difficult to accept for people in the immediate vicinity.
Oh my goodness, yes. And it's so much for someone else to hold, And what I've learned, and why I'm in Spain right now, is that grief is always going to be a part of my life. That was a long-term relationship. I can't expect to just get over that quickly, right? I expected that of myself because,
Yeah.
For me in the US, we're expected to buck up and get with it,
Yeah.
Deal with your pain and privacy.
Exactly.
And get on with your life.
And it's not a switch you just turn off.
No. And so what I've learned is that grief is there. And really my work now is to build my life around that grief. And so it's not my job to make the grief smaller, but it's my job to make that mason jar larger around that grief. And that's really what I've been working on, is, moving to Spain and building not necessarily a bigger life, but a life outside of that grief. And, it hasn't been easy. Moving here has not been easy at all. It's had its challenges, but it has helped me so much in building really that bigger space around the grief. And the grief feels like it's getting smaller. It's still there. There's still moments, right? But my life itself is getting larger. So, yeah, so my second Camino was so different. I don't know if you want me to go on or.
Yes, yes. Well, tell us about that. I mean,
Okay.
the first one was prior to COVID, and then
Yep.
now you walked the recent one, which, as you say, must have been very different.
It was completely different. In my first Camino, I was so deep in pain that anybody that would talk to me heard my story, right? And that story was a mess. And I knew that when I walked this Camino, I was in a different place, and that now I could be a space holder for people, and I could be a listener. And I didn't need to throw up my story to every single person I met. And so every morning I would wake up and kind of think about, what's my intention today? Who do I want to show up as today on the Camino? And so very few people really learned about my story. They still learned things about my life and about what I was doing, but I didn't have to share that pain portion. And I can't tell you, that was such a healing thing for me to be able to see that, yes, I'm not perfect. I'm far from it. I still have my days, but I was able to once again become someone that could hear others' stories, and it didn't have to be about me anymore.
I find this is such a precious gift of the Camino
Yes.
in us sharing our stories, our histories of what we've gone through, because for most of us, we went through some story, some event that persuaded us to walk this path. And as you say, just listening to other people's stories is part of the transformational process, where then we ourselves are healed just by holding other people's stories and just listening.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I thought about. The first time I walked, I handed out little quotes to people. I had this little quote bag, and people could reach in and grab a quote from the day. This time when I was walking, I knew that I was probably going to be walking with a lot of non-English speakers. And I'm like, I can't carry that many quotes in all these different languages. How am I going to do that, And so I really decided that what was the gift I could give every day? And that gift was listening. That gift was kindness. That gift was a smile to someone. And while it was very simple, it was very powerful for me to be able to be in a different situation. And I also knew that I was, that my life was expanding around the grief when I was able, when someone would really ask, like, what's your background, what's been going on, when I was able to convey that story without tears, without nothing wrong with tears. So if you're out there and hurting, cry it out. I cried a lot, but it feels good now to be able to share the story in a way to show my growth and to show how you can, begin to heal from something like that. So anyway, the walk also was a celebratory walk, right? My first one was all about grief processing. And this one was so different because I was walking to my new home, to the place I was going to live for at least a year. And that was a whole different feeling, to be walking as a pilgrim, but also know that I was also moving from being a pilgrim walking the Camino to a pilgrim living on the Camino. The home that I'm living in, the front door opens directly onto the Camino. I mean, the minute I step across my threshold, I'm on the Camino. And that comes with, that's a blessing, a great gift, because that's where I feel most alive, is on the Camino. But also carries with it some responsibility, because every time I walk out, there are pilgrims coming by, right? And so I have an opportunity where I can hold stories again, where I can be a listener, or maybe it's a tea, maybe it's handing somebody a snack or providing directions or whatever it is. Sometimes it's very, very simple. But yeah, it's been a big change in my life to be here. And it has come with, though, I want to say to folks that I know as a pilgrim, the very first walk, and I always see those signs, say Vende, and you dream about getting a place on the Camino. It's one thing to be a pilgrim on the Camino. It's one thing to be a tourist in Spain, and it's a whole nother thing to be living in Spain.
Absolutely. You know, there are so many people who have this dream, so many pilgrims who
Yeah.
have this dream of, yes, I want to run an albergue and I want to live on the Camino because this experience is so precious. And as you say, working in an albergue is so different, or running an
Yes.
albergue is entirely different. So tell us about some of those challenges you faced immediately after starting your life in Spain.
Yeah, so my Spanish is not good at all. I wish that I would have
Well,
studied
join the
much.
club.
Okay, good. I wish that I would have studied harder, but I don't know if that would have worked. It's so different. I think one of the biggest challenges for me is that one, I live in a very, very small village. While it is the heart of the Camino, and I love it here, and everyone is so kind, there are very few English speakers in my village, which is going to be good. It's going to force me to learn Spanish. I knew that coming in. But also that makes it very lonely. And so when I do go out to go shopping, usually I go to Astorga. That's the closest big town. So it's about a 30-minute drive from where I live. Many of you probably remember Astorga. So Rabanal is between
Oh,
Astorga
yes,
and Cruz de
absolutely.
Ferro.
Yeah.
So it's just a challenge trying to do anything. Coming on my initial arrival, just doing the paperwork processing that I had to do for my visa was really challenging. And I think it's more challenging because I moved to a place where they're not used to having expats, right? So I'm showing up to get fingerprinted and they're looking at me like, what are you doing? And the culture is different. And I knew that, but I didn't realize how much. I think when we're walking the Camino, there's a whole culture around that, and they're used to us showing up and asking for Band-Aids or ordering a cafe con leche. But all of a sudden I was doing real life, right? Like I got to show up at the grocery store. I didn't know it was a custom here that you have to wear gloves to pick up fruit. Some grocery stores require you weigh stuff before you go to the register. Some don't. I've been yelled at in the grocery store more than I can tell you. And it's hard for me because one, everybody's still wearing the mask. So I can't see facial expression. And the facial expressions here, in my humble opinion, in my experience, is not the way it is in the US. In the US, there's service with a smile, and that service might be fake. I don't know, but it's more comfortable for me, And so I walk in and, I feel like I'm getting a death stare when I walk in to do anything. And so it makes me really nervous. And so with my limited Spanish, I kind of panic. So any appointment, oh my goodness, it's very stressful. I'll get out Google Translate. It must not be working because sometimes they just look at me like I'm crazy.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of sign language pointing. And most times everybody's super kind, but it's very challenging. And what I say to folks is that I'm exhausted by the end of the day. Like just going to the grocery, and the other thing, I don't know how this was for you, Reno, but to buy contact solution, I have to go to an eye doctor office. To get ibuprofen, I have to go to the pharmacia. In the US, you do all that at the grocery, right? So my errands take forever. So imagine also setting up a new household. I've got a lot of little things you don't normally have to do that are difficult anytime you move. But you add in a language barrier and new customs, COVID issues, it's exhausting. So,
Well, it's good that you mentioned that because obviously these are challenges to deal with. And I know people who've given up and said, no, I'm not doing this anymore.
yeah.
I'm going home.
Yes. And there's been some days where I'm like,
Yeah.
can I do this? Am I strong enough? Rayo, I have worked really hard in the last 2 years to find my voice as an adult single woman, right? Like my former husband, he handled all of our finances. He's very, very smart financially. He did a great job. I didn't have to do that kind of thing. Well, when I became single, slowly I had to start learning how to be the adult in my life. And I got my voice and I felt strong. Well, all of a sudden, I'm thrown back into a situation where I don't have a voice anymore because I can't speak Spanish. So now I'm at a bank where I'm trying to set up an account, and I'm still, I mean, I have an account. I was blessed to have a Camino angel, Kim, who owns the Stowboat where I'm the artist in residence. She has been such a Camino angel for me. She has lived in Spain for 20 some years. She's a pilgrim. And so she's American as well. And so she knows some Spanish. She's much better than me. So she was very helpful upon my move. So thank God I have that. But also, I'm a person that's trying to be independent, right? Like I leaned on my husband for 20 some years. I don't want to have to lean on somebody. So there's this fine balance of asking for help, but also being independent. And, I got to find my voice here in Spain, and that's challenging. And so, I'm not going to, it
What
took
I
me a
find
while
so
to,
what
yeah.
I find so fascinating about your story is that you actually went out and did it. You walked the Camino, you are now living on the Camino, and I know so many people who say, "Oh, one day I want to walk the Camino. It's on my bucket list." Or I'll do it when I retire. I'll do it when I have so much money. I'll do it then and then. And it gets postponed, postponed, and it never happens. So,
Yeah.
especially now looking at women wanting to walk the Camino and
Yeah.
looking at walking it alone, that's a
Yes.
question that often comes up. Can
Yes.
I walk the Camino alone as a single woman? Is it dangerous?
Yep.
How can I do this? What message would you give those people?
Oh boy, it has so many. I want to tell you two stories on that front. First, I'll start with the women on the Camino and walking on your own. Um, you know, I will say to every woman out there, I have walked with every age of, of females, from young girls to much older women in their 90s, actually. And I feel safe on the Camino. I feel very safe. I actually feel safer than walking in the US. And part of that reason is that, if I'm on a trail in the US, and this is just my personal opinion, but a lot of times there seems to be people sometimes walking that you don't know why they're there. They're not maybe dressed in hiking clothes, or there's just something odd, to where on the Camino, I feel it's pretty obvious. Everybody's walking one direction. Everyone's there with a purpose. You see the backpack, you start talking to them. And even if you can't speak in the same in a common language, you feel the camaraderie. And, um, you know, a good friend of mine has said that you start off walking the Camino solo, but you're not really walking alone. You're walking with 500 other people. And that is true. There's usually somebody ahead of you, somebody behind you. You usually see someone. But with that being said, and I think this is true for probably males as well as females, when you're alone, you are exposed and you are vulnerable. And, I would say to women, you still got to keep your eyes open. I would say that same thing to a man, be aware of your surroundings. I don't really wear my earbuds very often. I'm constantly surveying, making sure that who's around me, what's going on. I had one situation where I think this time I kind of let my guard down. And I had reached this little spot. I can't remember now what town, maybe out of Zubiri. And there was this kind of like a grotto for Mary. And I was really moved by it. And I thought, I'm going to sit here, have a little lunch, and just get comfortable. And I started playing some Ave Maria, and I was really enjoying myself. And then I took off my shoes, and I had all my food out. And then I had all this stuff out of my backpack, okay, in the process of doing this. And this was a Spanish weekend holiday, okay, a holiday weekend in Spain. And all of a sudden, this van pulls up, this white van. It's always a white van. It's scary. I don't know why, but that's always in US scary movies. And this white van pulls up, and it's this guy. He's alone, and he drives past me. The path at that point was kind of you could drive on it. And so he passes me, then he backs up, pulls back up, stops. And I have this moment of, I haven't seen anybody quite a while. There had been a couple that had been where I was right when I sat down that I had met earlier in the morning. So I knew they were ahead of me, but it had been a while. I'm not seeing anybody else come up. And my intuition, and this is the first thing I say to people, is be aware. Two, when your intuition says you need to do something, respect it. And at that moment, this guy might have been harmless, but I was like, I'm alone. I don't know what he's doing. He's got a van. I need to move. So I quickly picked, and I mean quickly, I didn't put my socks on. I didn't tie my shoes. I put my shoes on quickly. I threw everything in my bag. I didn't even know if I had everything, but I knew I needed to go. I walked so fast right now. I can't even describe to you, almost a run, sometimes a run, until I could see the couple that had last been there. And by the time I got to that portion of the trail, I knew that I could stop and slow down and get back to my pace. I sat down, put on my socks, did everything, took a breath, and meditated for a minute that I was safe and I was okay, and that I listened to myself, and I probably was safe all along, but I wanted to listen to my intuition. So lesson learned, the other thing I want to say is listen to your intuition, respect it, but also in that scenario, I made what I think a rookie mistake that I shouldn't have made. And that was putting myself in a vulnerable position of having all of my stuff laying around, not being able to go quickly. I was lucky that had that been dangerous, I don't know, maybe he would have caught up with me, because it did take me a minute to do all that, So, I just say to women that, nothing happened. I was safe. But on the Camino, there are things that can happen. This is real life, real world. There are still situations that can occur. So I do feel safe as a woman here, but I always keep my eyes open. And I say that for men and women.
I think that is really good advice, because I'd go with that the Camino is pretty safe, but there are always evil people out there, and you've got to be situationally aware. And there's always also the possibility of keeping other pilgrims in sight, even if you're walking alone. Still, you have the, especially on the Frances, you have the possibility of keeping an eyesight of each other.
Exactly. Yeah, I totally agree. And, and I think everyone's very willing to help you. If you see somebody and you've had a situation like that and you say, hey, like, I just felt uncomfortable, people will walk with you, and you don't have to talk the whole time, and you can be a distance apart from each other, but close enough that you feel safe.
Absolutely. Because I think this is also a very precious part of walking is the alone time in dealing with your issues, in walking things off. It's so essential, and it's so sad to actually rob yourself of this experience because of some uncertain fears.
Yes, I want to tell you maybe one other story about you. You talked about my actually doing this, moving to Spain and actually giving this a try. And so what I wanted to share with you was that as I was walking and people would ask me, where are you walking to? Because I wasn't originally going to tell people what I was doing, right? And then people would ask me, what are you doing? Well, I felt, they're like, you going to Santiago? And I felt like, I had to be authentic and say, no, actually, I'm not this time. Here, I'm walking to where I'm moving to. So then they would ask me questions about that, and I would tell them. And typically the response, well, I'll give you one example. So there were two young guys from Colorado and Alaska. And I walked with the guy from Colorado for quite a while one day. And he was just very interested, a young guy, and he was telling me about his career changes. And so he was asking me about what I was doing. And then eventually, because I think it's important to walk on your own, I tend to not walk with people the whole day, So I said, well, I'm going to go ahead. And so we divided up. Well, then later that night, I ran into him again, and this time he was with his friend from Alaska, and he walks up to me and he says, I am so glad that we ran into you again. And I said, oh, okay, why? And he says, because I can't stop telling my friend, all we've talked about this after since meeting you is what a badass you are and how strong you are to be doing what you're doing. And I was taken back, I was like, badass? Me? Strong? Me? And then that same thing kind of happened a couple of other times, right? I ran into a couple of women. They said the same kinds of things. And that did not feel comfortable for me. I'm like, that didn't feel authentic. I'm not a badass. I'm not strong. if they saw me over the last couple of years, I was laying on the floor crying many days. I would not call that strong badass. But I was like, what are they saying to me? Why can I not own these identities that they're trying to give me? Because those are very powerful, very positive. I'd like to wear that, but they don't fit. And then one day, somebody said to me, we had walked together for a while and we had exchanged WhatsApp numbers. And later in the day, he sent me a message and he said, I just wanted to tell you that you were such a brave heart. And that, I just stopped walking when I read that. And I'm like, I can wear that. That I can wear. I'm being brave. That's what I'm doing. I'm trying to live in my heart. I'm trying to listen to my intuition. I'm not necessarily strong. I try to be. I'm not badass. I might have moments. But yeah, brave I can wear. And that has been such an inspiration to me. Just this morning when I was journaling, it's like, I try to channel in Gandhi. I recently rewatched his movie and the autobiographical movie about Gandhi. And it really hit me that that's what I'm trying to do, is to be brave, to have a brave heart, to live in my heart. And, so I say to people, don't wait for it to be perfect. If it is your dream to do something, not everybody wants to walk the Camino. Not everybody, I don't understand that, because I think everybody should, but not, if your dream is to move to Spain, then go for it. Don't wait for perfection, because if you're waiting until you're ready, you might not ever come.
I think that is such important advice. Absolutely. Because doesn't the universe always send us some signals way ahead? It might be a book that you coincidentally pick up, like what happened to me. I picked up Paulo Coelho's Pilgrimage at a time where I just needed it.
Yes.
Some person just saying something where it resonates, where you say, well, that's it.
Yes.
Or some image, some picture appears and you say, wow, that's another sign.
Exactly.
And if we don't take these signs seriously, we're never going to make that move.
No. And my whole life really has been that, maybe my entire life, but, the last couple of years obviously are in my head right now. But, when I started my podcast, I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't go out there and research how to be a great podcaster, how to do whatever. And, I just want to be myself. And I want the people I interview to be themselves. And had I waited and tried to, now I see these posts about how to do the podcast the right way and all these things, I think I would have never started. And had that podcast that I started on a whim with no planning has brought so much to my life. I can't even tell you. I've made more friends in the past 2 years. Like during COVID, my Camino connections grew an unbelievable amount from that podcast, that almost virtually everybody I talk to right now is because of the podcast or a Camino. I mean, they're combined. I don't know how they separate them, but where I'm living is because of my podcast. And what I say there is that I was approached. Kim, it was recommended to Kim to check out my podcast. She does. She contacts me. Hey, I hear you're moving to Spain. What would you think about maybe being here and working on your stuff, being an artist in residence? And that would have never come to me had I sat at home going, well, I think someday maybe I'll start a podcast, right? And, I say to people, if you watch my podcast, I make a lot of mistakes. But that's okay with me.
Not waiting for perfection. I think that's just it.
Yeah.
Just to learning by doing and just to do it. But another question: you've spoken to so many pilgrims.
Yes.
You've heard so many stories. We are going through a difficult period as a humanity,
Yes.
and I find there are so many people out searching for something.
Yeah.
A lot of pilgrims going on the Camino are in search of something. Where would you see a common denominator? Where are we heading? Obviously, of course, we are only a small percentage of people who've walked the Camino, but there seems to be some denominator that is urging people on to do something.
Yeah. I think what initially comes to my mind right now is I think we're all looking for connection. And I kind of see that three ways on the Camino. One is connection back to who you are in your very essence, without all the identities, mom, sister, yoga teacher, whatever identities you wear, coming back to who you really are inside. So that's the first connection. And I think that's something you find with the solitude and the silence when you're walking, when you don't have to worry about all your day-to-day activities. All you got to do pretty much is, what is it? Eat, walk, eat, sleep, repeat. It's just this thing, and you just find this time that you can really turn back into yourself. So that's the first connection. Second connection, I think, is connecting to that bigger source in your life, whatever you call it, God or the universe, whatever it is for you, is finding that quiet to reconnect back to source, that you're just kind of this thing in this great big world. And I think we're all looking for that. And, we might not be finding that in church buildings or in religious communities that maybe people way before us found. Maybe that is where you find it. And you certainly get your dose of that on the Camino, because there's a bunch of churches you can stop in and a lot of sacred spots. So I think connection back to the divine, connection to your source is there. And then, well, I should say there's 4 connections. The third one would be connection to people. I have read so many Camino memoirs in my job as a podcaster and as a Camino geek. And really those stories almost always come down to connection. It's always the stories about the people you meet and the stories they tell you or the stories they share with you to help you with your processing. So I think, especially after COVID, we haven't seen people's faces. A lot of us have lived alone, for the last couple of years. And wow, I can't tell you, when I did this walk, it was a little scary the first time I was in Pamplona after they reopened, and going out and getting pinchos in crowded bars. That was, whoo. And so, and people were being safe and they were wearing masks when it was right and all of that. But also that was, it was strange to be in groups again. But oh my goodness, once I got past that initial fear, I can't tell you how comforting it was to have a pilgrim family again, and to, the group dinners, the communal dinners aren't as much right now because of COVID and the situations here. But those moments when I got to have that, they were precious. And then the fourth connection is connection back to nature. Being around trees, your feet on dirt and being able to walk up and touch a tree and pick up a stone. And for me, right before our walk, I was just out walking on the Camino, and, I stopped, put my hand on a tree. On the way back, I walked as slowly as I can, just reconnecting to sky and to the sun and to the moon. During my walk, the sun was behind me, the moon was ahead, and by the end of the walk, the sun was ahead. And it just, it's that reconnecting back to the seasons, living by season, living more naturally, which I think in our everyday life, we are so disconnected from that. We're disconnected from people, we're disconnected from nature, we're disconnected from source. We have to work really hard to keep those connections in our everyday life. And I think on the Camino, it provides that portal of reconnecting to all those things. And for some of us, maybe one of those areas are what we're really going to focus on, or maybe it's all of them, but I think you can find them on the Camino. So to me, that's what draws us to the Camino. And I think that's what draws us to want to walk again. I'm fascinated by that. Like people who have walked many times, like you, right? Like there's this secret sauce on the Camino that.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That
And I think
what
you just mentioned, this word connection, reconnection, connection, what is so missing in our society at the moment, at a time where so much is is pulling at our minds, distracting us from who we really are. And I'm so happy that so many more people are now feeling this.
Yeah.
I've got to do something. I've got to reconnect. There's something I need to search for. But very few people take the step. And I think your message here is so valuable for so many people.
Yeah. And I would say to people, it is a big deal. If you're going to walk the whole Camino Frances, that is a lot of time off of work. And if you can't afford the time, or you can't take that much time, obviously I feel very strongly that the more days you can walk, all the better. But, my first Camino was pretty short. And to me, I know there's a lot of judgment out there, folks, just like in real life, of what is a real Camino. To me, it's all about the intention you put into it, and how you walk and what you do on your walk. And if you've only got a weekend, I met a lot of Spaniards, and I met a lot of people from all over Europe who walk just segments of the Camino each year. And, they don't go by this rule that the guidebooks maybe say, oh, you got to do it in 34 stages, right? And that was eye-opening to me, even this time walking, because I had never walked with so many people that were doing that. And so I just want to encourage people that especially, if you're a little, maybe have some fear about walking, then come and walk a week, come and get a taste. And then maybe you'll come back and walk further.
Absolutely. I think there's no rule book here.
No.
Some people are saying you have to walk the entire 500-mile route. No, every person walks his Camino, whether it's a week or 6 weeks. It's where you're at the moment. And as you say, getting a taste initially. My first walk was 10 days, and I was knackered. I had the wrong equipment, I had the wrong shoes, I had the wrong backpack. And I went back the next year and I did 4.5 weeks.
Yeah. Okay. Same thing. Same thing. And I'm saying, and you got to get over this whole thing. Okay. So even if you're walking the whole path, guess what, folks? There's going to be somebody walking way further than you, because I met people that had walked from their homes from Belgium. I met people that had been walking for 5 months already when they showed up in Saint Jean. So, this is not a competition. And if you allow it to become a competition, you're missing the point, right? And other people may do that. Yeah, other people may do that.
Absolutely.
That's their business.
Yeah.
But you got to do what's right for you. And, so maybe some people need 5 months. Maybe some people need 8 months of walking.
I want to get on that point about preparing for the Camino. You're a yoga teacher, and I think that's a good background for mindfulness and walking. What advice would you give people on preparing mindfully for the Camino?
Preparing mindfully. Oh, so many things. Okay, first off is, thinking about, what kinds of things do you want to do when you're on the Camino? What kinds of rituals, what kind of prayers, what kind of meditations do you want to do? Thinking about that a little bit before you leave your home, I think is very helpful. Having an idea of how you're going to be more mindful. So, for example, some of the things that I do when I'm walking, I will do metta, loving kindness, every morning. So that's, may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I be at ease. And then you go through several people. Then I do one that's just about the senses. What am I smelling? What am I seeing? What am I hearing? And jotting those things down, because it's with that connection that you can really, if you journal about that, you can remember so much about your Camino if you're in connection with those senses. Maybe having a portion of the walk every day where you're just silent walking as slowly as you can really helps you connect. So, and having things in, what would you call it, your toolbox that you can pull out, rather than having to create all that from your first day. Because if you're not careful on the Camino, in my opinion, you can get caught up in creating a pilgrim family. And you can quickly socialize. You can quickly become who you are off the Camino, socializing all the time, not really being alone. And while that's fun to have that connection, you also are missing an opportunity. So if you're not planning to be mindful, you might forget to be mindful. So that in itself is in the morning, every morning is thinking about, what is my intention today as I'm going to walk? How do I want to show up? And part of that is saying, though, I'm going to be open, not having an expectation of, where I might get food, where I'm going to stay tonight. Being still open to the experience is one intention to have. You're going to be a lot happier walking if you have that intention, in my opinion. But setting intention. Also being connected to your body. So, of course, I encourage you to be doing some training at home as best as you can, and it's hard to emulate all the different terrain you're going to walk on, the altitude that you might experience, the weather that you might experience wherever you live. But, try to change it up. Part of my training is walking with one foot on the street and one foot on the curb, getting used to being off balance. Walking on different terrain and wherever I'm living. So I was last in Bainbridge Island. So I walked some on the beach. I walked some in the woods. I would try to change it up where I could. When I was in Salt Lake City, it was a lot easier to get the altitude training. Couldn't get that in Bainbridge. So change up your training, walk fast, walk slow, try different things. But doing yoga is so essential for these reasons. Training with some yoga before you come, you're going to be a little more flexible, that's great. But the key thing is you're going to know your body. And knowing your body and honoring when the body talks to you is so critical as you walk a Camino. I have seen people that get injured, or they're starting to have an injury, right? They start feeling something happening, down at the bottom of the leg, like, oh, what's that? And then they just ignore it and they keep walking. And they maybe keep walking fast because they don't want to lose their pilgrim family, or, they want to get to a certain town by a certain time. And the next thing they know, they're injured and their Camino might be over.
That's the whole point.
Yes.
When I did my stint as a hospitaliero in Najera 2 years ago,
Yes.
I saw so many pilgrims come in with broken feet and hurt
Yes.
knees, and seeing the Camino as a crucifixion and to
Yes.
inflict pain on yourself, that's not the Camino. It's
No.
practicing self-care, really.
Yes. And oh my God, I'm so glad you said that, Rabanal. Yes. And I think with yoga, it gives you time to get to know yourself, who you are, what your capabilities are at this time, which is different. I have a different body than I did at 20. I have a different body than I did last week. And I need to really be aware of what's going on with my body. And the reason I'm saying this, and I want to encourage people, there's a lot of stuff out there. If you're on Facebook or, whatever, you got to carry everything. You got to wear certain shoes. You got to do this. You got to do that. Some people that don't believe in walking with poles or whatever. You know what? That's their opinion. That's their body. When you're 20, maybe you don't need poles. Maybe when you're 60, you don't need them. But maybe with who you are, it's good for you.
This
right?
is a question that often comes up is,
yes.
Look, I'm 65 or I'm 70. Can I walk the Camino? Is it possible for me to walk the Camino? I tell these people, of course it is. It's how you do it. Yes. Nobody's telling you to carry a heavy backpack. You can have a taxi to transport your backpack.
Exactly.
You can walk 5 kilometers or 10 or 15, depending on how your body is.
Right. And listening and honoring your body, admitting to yourself that I can't really carry 30 pounds or whatever in a backpack, it's better to use this transfer service for your backpack, because if you don't, you might end up injured and you're going to be spending that same money you could have spent transferring your backpack. You're going to be spending it at the doctor.
Yeah.
Or you're going to be spending it having to spend extra nights at somewhere because you have too many blisters, right? And I think part of yoga and mindfulness is being aware of what's going on in your body, being aware of how you're really feeling and checking in with yourself. If you really need to take a break, you need to be honest with yourself and take that break.
Yeah,
when you need it, not
and
because
hurting
you're
or
forced.
torturing yourself is not the way to deal with grief.
No. And I will tell you this, even on this last walk, wow, you have got to be above being shamed. You have to really, for me, knowing all this, all the people I've interviewed, right? I still had to work on this because I was getting judged. So I'll tell you right now, for everybody that's out there, I knew when I started this walk, I have a knee that's been acting up, and I knew I had to take care of myself. So I stopped at Orson, and I stopped at the new albergue, which was wonderful. So I highly recommend it. And I had the heavier backpack than I knew I should have, but I was trying to really, be strong. And I did walk with it for several days. And then I was like, I don't know what to do. Maybe I should use a service a couple of days. So I did use the service. And then you know what? It didn't work for me. And here's why it didn't work for me. I don't like having to repack 2 different bags. It was stressful in the morning to have my bag somewhere. And so I call her Little Red. It's my original backpack for my 10-day Camino. So she's much smaller, right? And I love her. And I had her with me in my bigger backpack, right? And I'm like, okay, I got to somehow get back to Little Red because that's who I need to be walking with. So how am I going to make that happen? So when I got to Logroño, I shipped some stuff back. I got rid of some stuff and I got down to Little Red. Now, I got to tell you, getting down to Little Red and walking with Little Red from Logroño all the way to Rabanal, there were things that I really wanted that I didn't have, but I got down to the basics. And that worked better for me, right? But the surprising thing is I started getting judged. So one day I'm walking, and I'm a fast walker some days, right? I have my poles and I'm going, and I'm just in the groove. And I had met some people earlier in the day, and then I passed them up. I say, hey, bon camino, and then I keep going, and then they catch up to me till a little later. I was taking a little break, and this young guy from Italy, looks at me in English and he says, well, no wonder you can walk so fast because you're not carrying all your stuff. And I didn't have a good yoga moment. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is all my stuff. And at this time I was walking with my friend Crotty, who I'd met on the Camino. And I look at him and I say, Crotty, tell them, because he's been seeing me, at night. He knows this is the only bag he's been seeing. There's no transfer of my bag. And again, not because there's, shame in transferring, because I did use it. And it was nice having the service, right? It just didn't work for me personally. But I was so hurt by this. And man, then I started walking and I get to this next cafe, and I'm sitting there, and Crotty and I are having our second Camino breakfast, and I'm still fuming about this, right? So I'm not being very mindful. And who walks in? Of course, this guy, right? He sits down right next to me, and he's nursing a hurt knee, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, oh my God, Leigh. Oh my God. What was your intention this morning? Your intention was kindness and to be giving. And look at you. You're sitting here so mad at this guy for judging you. Because what? Your ego? Because you want everyone to know you're just carrying Little Red. Look how strong you are, right? And I'm like, oh, we got to start on. So I look over at him and I say, hey, what's going on? And he says, Aunt Anna, what's going on with my knee? And I'm like, hey, look, I've got this cream, this ibuprofen cream. It doesn't exist in the US, but someone told me about it here in Spain. Hey, here it is. You want to put some on, And so we start talking, and he's got a lot of pride now. So his ego's like, oh, no. I'm like, hey, look, yesterday I was having a little tendonitis, and, I got some of it, and it made a huge difference for me. So please just try it. We'll catch up later. You can give it back to me, but I'd rather you not be hurt. So then he finally takes it, and then I don't know, there was something else that I gave him. I can't remember what it was. And then we end up having this really lovely conversation, and I see he's really a nice guy, right? And then I could see right away, that he then was feeling guilty for the judging, right? And from then on, we were good buds. But, you really have to look at, like, I let my ego get a hold of me there, and that's okay. It's a good lesson, right? And, there was some reason he was judging me. Maybe his backpack was heavy, and I'm sure maybe he wasn't happy carrying it. And so, what I say to people is, know yourself. I knew better. I knew better than to take that big backpack. But somebody had told me, oh, this is the one you're going to want because of blah, 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 blah. No, it didn't work for me. I'm a tiny girl. when somebody says take 10% of your weight, that's all you should be taking. And when you're my weight, that's not very much. And you are going to have to maybe sacrifice some things. I will say that you can buy things here. Don't depend though at the moment you need it that you can buy it, right? There's going to be some times that some angels may have to provide for you, but there's probably somebody that's going to walk by that will have something that you need, or you will get it later that night.
Yeah, there's the saying, the Camino always provides. There's often this stress of finding accommodation. People hurry along because they want to reach the next village because they fear they won't find a place to sleep. And, I've walked 13 Caminos, and I've walked in summer months, and I always found a place to sleep.
Exactly. You will find a place. You may have to be flexible in what you want, right?
Absolutely.
Especially right now with the COVID stuff, right? So, there wasn't as much availability as there was the first time I walked. So I will say that a little more planning maybe has to be, you just have to see what kind of person you are. And this is where it gets back to being mindful about who you are. If you are the kind of person that's going to drive you nuts and it's going to mess up your Camino, I encourage you though, maybe mix it up and just see, maybe you can do it. Or, if you're the kind of person that has to have your own room, and then, live with that and own it. It's okay. If you want to use the service for your backpack transfer, it's all right.
Yeah, and you don't have to stay in an old bag with 20 other people. No. It's your choice. Yes, exactly. It's a good experience. I'd recommend every pilgrim to do it, but it's everybody's choice.
Exactly. And, there's consequence. One of the things I hope I'll get around to writing this blog post, but everything's a consequence, just like in life. If you choose to not stay at an albergue, then that might mean that it's harder for you to have a communal dinner. Well, for me, that's a trade-off I don't really like. I like having communal dinner. So I enjoy those nights when I do stay at an albergue to have that. But also, I'm 56. Sometimes the girl needs some sleep. And so I also like a nice place to stay sometimes, right? I like my own single room and my own shower. So I mixed it up. There were nights that I was in a typical albergue. There were nights I was in a really nice place. And I have no shame around that. If somebody has an opinion about that, that's their opinion. And I got to do what's best for me. But I got to say, I'm human. So there was that moment when my ego was like, I know, I can walk with Big Red, or I'm not using a service. And I just had to laugh at myself and be like, oh, there you are.
Yeah, the Camino is such a good analogy of life, isn't it?
Oh, my God. Everything you do in real life will show up on the Camino. The things you fear, the things that, and the best part about it is I feel like it's this little safe laboratory where you can play around with being, a little different, right? Like I'm a talkative person. I like to talk. I know you probably know that already, but one day someone, I don't know if it was, I'm trying to remember now whose book it was in, but it was in someone that I've interviewed where they talked about maybe, and David White talks about this a lot in his poetry, is go against yourself, go against the grain. So there were a couple of days where my intention was, today, just be quiet. If you're going to say something, does it really need to be said? And just play with that. What's that feel like to be different? And it's a very safe environment on the Camino to show up differently. So the opposite of that would be if you're introverted and you tend to not want to meet new people, I would say maybe one day your intention is go against your grain and be bold and talk to people, because it's a safe place. Everybody is very kind. And so it's a place to kind of play with, like, oh, maybe I could show up different in real life sometimes if I want to. Not real life, but life outside the Camino. So I feel like it's this great laboratory to one point where you still have work.
Oh, absolutely.
Let me tell you, those people that you don't want to walk with, they will find you.
They'll find you.
They'll find you. And you'll be like, oh. I mean, there was one person that I would like, okay, I know I'm really far ahead. Like there's no way I'm going to see them again, right? And it was just a personality, right? No big deal. And I swear to you, somehow, there they'd be ahead of me. And I'm like, how did that happen? I never saw them pass me. And, and then it would be like, after the third time, okay, God, this is funny. What's the lesson? What am I not doing with this person? And there was one person in particular that I figured it out. And it was like, oh, there you are. You took that abrasive personality as something else, that they were just being mean. Oh my God, when I heard their story, I just melted, right? And, thank you, God. Then it became, thank you, God, for forcing me to have to see that in myself and to have the opportunity now for them to share. And so, that's what comes up in life. People say, oh, this magic happens. Camino magic, Camino provides, Camino miracles, all this. Those things are happening everywhere all the time around us. But on the Camino, again, it's that laboratory. It's more obvious. You've slowed down and you can see, oh my goodness, I just thought to myself that I really need a Band-Aid and I don't have any, and I wish I could find a Band-Aid. And then somebody comes by and somehow they're like, I wanted to get rid of some Band-Aids. Like, what? And it becomes this Camino magic. But I think, one of the reasons that maybe all of us walk again is that is happening in real life, but we miss it.
We miss it. Exactly. Yeah.
And on the Camino, it's more obvious. And so it's a great reminder to know that, it's the Camino. It really helps you.
Leigh, we could talk for many more hours to share our Camino stories. It was so nice to talk to you again.
You too.
And what message would you like to give to people out there?
Oh boy, I would say, it's been a really challenging year for all of us in the whole world. And, hopefully we're coming out of that. And if you have the opportunity to walk, if the seed has been planted, in my opinion, you will walk. Clear the space so you can take this walk and go on the Camino. I don't know anyone that says, well, I really regretted that Camino. Like typically for most people, it is an experience that can really lead to transformation. And I just hope that if the seed has been planted, that you will do what needs to be done to get yourself here when you feel safe to walk, when the world is healed, and whenever you're allowed to. I hope that you will come. And if you walk in the next year, please come say hi in Rabanal. I would love to meet you and be that Camino angel for you if you need some help. So just, may our world heal.
Thank you so much, Leigh. Thank you for sharing your story, your vulnerability, and how you dealt with all that. I think that's such an important message for everyone.